very pleased to welcome you here tonight for a discussion on the Venezuelan migrant crisis that has dominated headlines for years now and has caused a state of emergency in the city of Denver for a little over a year. As President Kennedy said, we are a nation of immigrants. While the length of our residency in the United States varies, very few Americans can state 100% American heritage. Most of us came from somewhere else. The reasons for immigrating were typically similar: hope for a better future for ourselves and our families, our progeny. President Kennedy said, "The forces that moved our forebears to their great decision, the decision to leave their homes and begin an adventure filled with incalculable uncertainty, risk, and hardship, must have been of overpowering proportions." These 32,000 refugees and asylees from Venezuela, the topic of tonight's discussion and film, are no different. They want peace and security and stability, which do not currently exist in Venezuela. We'll talk about why that is, why Venezuela is such a hot mess when it was considered a model democracy as recently as 25 years ago. How that democracy teetered and collapsed under a democratically elected president and collapsed under a democratically elected president who consolidated powers through constitutional reforms, and what we might learn from their plight. Dr. Luis Torres, chair retired of Metropolitan State University of Denver's Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies, will give us a history of Venezuela's decline from democracy to chaos, and then we'll hear from filmmaker Andrew Kirschenbaum, who will put a human face on the crisis. Andrew spent time in Colombia documenting the journey of some of these migrants, getting to know them and their stories, and has created an award-winning short film. I'm excited that this event represents his Colorado premiere. Afterwards, we'll have time to ask these experts any questions you might have about this situation, and we'll share some resources about how you can help. I do ask that you hold your questions for both Luis and Andrew until after the film. Let's start with why. Why is this migration happening? Leading this discussion is Dr. Luis Torres. Dr. Torres is a longtime educator and administrator, having taught in higher education since 1972, first as a graduate student and then as English professor. He attended the University of Colorado Boulder for his BA in English, and then the University of Washington in Seattle for his MA and PhD in English. In 1995, he became professor and chair of Chicano Studies at Metropolitan State University of Denver. In 2006, he became associate dean in the College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences, and in 2008, deputy provost for academic and student affairs. In 2012, Dr. Torres helped implement an affordable tuition rate at MSU Denver for undocumented students before Colorado approved the measure. For his contributions to the discipline, he received the prestigious Scholar of the Year Award in 2016 from the National Association for Chicano and Chicano Studies, and has received at least 20 other academic and community awards. He's retired from MSU and is very active in the community educational efforts, including serving on the advisory board of our fantastic partner, El Seminario Dual Language newspaper. Welcome, Dr. Torres.
Thank you. You'll have to excuse me, I have notes since I'm an old professor type. Right? It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the movie, Nos Vemos Pronto. Interestingly, that term, as you know, that term is actually used when one is separating from a loved one, right? If I were to, I'm married, have children, etc. If I were to leave on a one-week trip, I'd say Nos Vemos Pronto, right? but this is a completely different matter. Thank you. And it's interesting. I'm just going to make a couple of comments about the movie, a couple of additional comments about the movie that we are going to see. It's interesting that the poet who begins the movie refers to she says that people are looking for dignified lives. That's quite profound, I think. Dignified lives. She refers also, where there's an image of the train. She refers to people leaving on La Bestia, the beast, right? Which of course are the trains that people take to come here. You know, why did this happen? One of the characters in the movie, not characters, one of the persons in the movie, one of the interviewees in the movie, you know, said that he missed his family, his home, his town, his customs, but mostly freedom, right? The freedom that they had until, as he says, socialism came, right? So the why, we will get to that in a bit, but I think that's a very important point. And you know, Hugo Chavez, referring to the socialism, actually Hugo Chavez was a Marxist. Wasn't just a socialist. He said in Spanish, you know, yo soy marxista. I am a Marxist. And so when we think about what happened and how it happened and when it happened and so on, that was really part of it. There's one more thing about the movie, and then I'll get into a little bit of history. I mean, the movie is fabulous. I really think it's a significant work. There's one image. Again, why did the collapse happen? There's one image of a man who was in Colombia. He had left Venezuela, and he took Venezuelan money with him. I should take my billfold out. I think I have a few dollars, but he is fashioning, for example, billfolds, purses, other items out of the money, because it has become so because of inflation, it's become so worthless essentially that he can do that with, you know, $50 bill, whatever it was. So that is part of what we're going to see. So how did this disaster in Venezuela happen? To go from one of the richest countries in South America to one of the poorest, with the worst emigration leaving, with one of the worst emigration in history, in the history of the Western Hemisphere. Over 7 million, I'll get to this number in a little bit, over 7 million have left. Over 7 million Venezuelans have left in the last 6, 7, maybe 8 years. It's taken a few years. Out of a country of only 30 million. They had only 30 million. That's at least 15%. My math isn't very good, but if we were to do the math there, imagine 15% of the people in the U.S. leaving within literally just a few years. So that really is a question. And for me, the work that I've done for this presentation, it really is a loss of democracy and a loss of the impact of people when they voted. They vote on one thing, something completely different happens. So the corruption and the loss of democracy really spread throughout the country. So in terms of numbers again, I'll just give a couple of numbers. That's why I brought these notes up. In 2017, there were 30,500,000 people in Venezuela. And again, within just a few years, beginning from that point, about 7.2 million people left because of what was going on. And when we think about Venezuela, their oil reserves, consider all of the countries in the world that have oil reserves, and most countries do. The U.S. is either number 6 or number 8 in terms of our oil reserves, depends on which statistics one looks at, and what is in reserve. The top three in the world: Canada at 168 billion barrels. Saudi Arabia, which we might assume is the major one, is second, 297 billion. Venezuela, 303 billion. 303 billion. The U.S. has a little over 50 billion barrels. Did I say barrels? 303 billion barrels for Venezuela, the highest in the entire world. The U.S. has approximately 50, maybe close to 60 billion. Compare that with our population versus theirs, and their reserves versus ours. They should have had a great future ahead of them. So just a couple of points about the presidents. Hugo Chavez was elected in 1998. So what has happened to Venezuela goes back, I think, roughly to about the year 2000. But in 1998, Hugo Chavez was elected, and as I said earlier, he called himself a Marxist, if I remember correctly, after the election. After the election, not before. For example, he oversaw the drafting of a new constitution shortly after he was elected. But that constitution gave him unprecedented control over the three branches of government. After that constitution, he was he really was essentially well, try not to say dictator yet, but let's use that term. I'll just go through this very quickly. He caused a lot of turmoil in Venezuela. There were strikes, for example. An opposition party, an opposition group at least, developed very quickly. In December 2006, he was elected again for president for a third time, and by a fairly good number. That ensured him another 6 years. They had a 6-year presidency term like Mexico does, but for Mexico, it's only one term. For Venezuela, after Chavez changed some of the laws, they could serve an unlimited number, not 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, an unlimited number. Chavez died in 2013. He got sick with cancer. He went to Cuba for medical care. By 2013, he had passed away, and Nicolás Maduro, the current president, still the current president, took over, and increasing authoritarianism with Nicolás Maduro also. As a result, there were very dramatic falling oil exports. The government's failure to adequately invest in the industrial sector, in any other sector other than oil. And the inflation, and I really want to emphasize this, the inflation really started to soar. We are concerned about inflation of 4%, 5%, 6%, right, per year. The inflation soon soared to over 800%. So if you previously could buy something with $1 or 1 bolivar, I believe it's called, by that time you would have to use 800. But that wasn't all. By 2018, it had skyrocketed again to 2,400%. 2,400%. Because of corruption, mismanagement, and so on. And it wasn't quite done. 2,400%. The International Monetary Fund predicted that inflation might reach 1,300% by year's end. 13,000%. So, yeah, because of that, by that time, at least 5,000 people per day were leaving Venezuela. 5,000 people per day. I'm going to jump ahead. As I said, 7.2 million had already left. It actually became 7.7 million by 2023, just last year. I want to give us a note of caution, though. We considered, I'm going to turn to the immigration into the U.S. and including with Denver Public Schools, and I realize I'm under a timeline. A note of caution. I realize that we hear all the time that we are in a crisis. Well, I would caution that somewhat. The Venezuelans are in a crisis. The immigrants are in a crisis. The immigrants from Venezuela who are right outside the door here, literally, and throughout Denver, are in a crisis. But again, just a note of caution. If we take all of the Hispanics or Latinos in the U.S., there are approximately 62 million of us. 62 million of us. Venezuelans account for about 1%. And that includes the Venezuelans who have been here for many years, the ones who were here 20, 30 years ago, right? So I realize the numbers seem very dramatic, and they are, especially for the Venezuelans. But I'm looking here at a table of the U.S. Hispanic populations and their nationalities. For Mexico, for example, 37,200,000 as of 2023. Of course, as I'm sure you know, large part of the U.S., large part of the western U.S. was Mexico quite some time ago. Puerto Ricans, 5,800,000. I'm just going to give a couple of them. Salvadorans, 2,500,000. Dominicans, 2,400,000. I'll jump down, number 7, Colombians, because Colombia is right next to Venezuela, and has had a large hand in Venezuelans going to Colombia, 1,400,000. So how about Venezuelans? Venezuelans are number 12 in the list of Hispanic groups living here in the U.S. at 640,000. By now, that's probably enough. We would have to add another 100,000 or so. So my point is, granted the immigration is sudden, very rapid, but again, a note of caution as to how we react, how our country reacts to Venezuela. I have another table here. I'm not going to refer to any specifics, but it's a table of the recent immigration by 17 different South American countries, including Venezuela, but Guatemala, just a few. Guatemala, Peruvians, Hondurans, Nicaraguans, Argentinians, Salvadorans, and so on. Out of those 17, the immigrant percentage of those populations in the U.S., every single one of them has declined over the last 5 or 6 years. Every one of them has declined. So the table goes down like that, except for Venezuela, of course. It is by far the outlier here, and that one goes up quite a bit. So at one and the same time, this is a very significant matter, but again, I would add a little bit of caution. For example, 1.8 million Venezuelans have gone to Colombia. 1.8 million. That doesn't mean that they're all living there, but out of the 7.7, they might have left Colombia. But out of the 7.7 million, 1.8 to Venezuela, 1.3 to Peru, which is quite a ways from Venezuela, and so on. Now, I want to make a comment here about the Venezuelans in Denver and the Venezuelans in, for example, Denver Public Schools. So I think it's very important to consider how to consider their movement into Denver, into Denver Public Schools. Whatever you might think about immigration, and specifically about Venezuelan immigration, the 3 major cities in the country that have really received a lot of these immigrants, we always hear about New York City and about Chicago. We hear much less about Denver. Those are the three major cities that Venezuelans have moved into the U.S. Denver, in terms of per capita, the number of people that we have in Denver and the number who moved into Denver, we have a higher per capita percentage than New York City by far, and more than Chicago. So for each of us in terms of per capita, we have received more Venezuelans. And just a couple more minutes. I really want to stress how I think Denver has done a very good job in welcoming these people and welcoming the Venezuelans, especially the children. I think we've done a very good job in housing, for example. When they first came here, as I'm sure you will remember, some of them would get off the buses, with T-shirts and jeans and sandals. And I thought, oh my goodness, what's going to happen in November, December, January with weather like we just had? So I would give a commendation to the mayor and to the city council and to others in the mayor's office in taking a proactive approach. And Denver Public Schools. I've been doing some work with Denver Public Schools, and I really want to stress that Denver Public Schools has done a very admirable job in trying to meet the needs of the students. About 2 weeks ago, the number that had come into Denver Public Schools was 2,000. About 2,000 students had come into Denver Public Schools since October. And October, interestingly, is the count day, if you know what the count day is. DPS take all of the schools in the state, take the count of how many students they have, send that information to the Colorado Department of Ed, and they get the funding back per student. These students came into DPS after the count day. So DPS has really had a difficult time, but they've done a very good job of trying to address the needs of these students. I said 2,000. Last week, there was an additional 300 in 1 week, and that number is now up to 2,700, which is larger than many of the school districts in Colorado, right? Not Jeffco, and not Cherry Creek and so on, certainly not Denver, not Colorado Springs, a few others. But that is a larger number than some of the school districts in Colorado. So DPS has had to adjust to try to make, make these students, make it welcome for these students. I'm going to end there, and then we will have another session in a little bit after the movie. So thank you for listening, and again, congratulations on the movie. I think it's excellent. We will be using it in the Chicana and Chicano studies departments throughout the country, I assure you.
Thank you, Dr. Torres. And noted, we don't have a border crisis, we have a humanitarian crisis.
Yes.
So we've heard the why, the reasons this migration is happening. Let's move to the who. So I'd like to introduce Andrew Kirschenbaum. Andrew is a documentary and narrative director based in New York City, producing projects in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and French across the globe. He holds a BA from Roger Williams University in International Relations and studied international negotiations and anthropology in the Czech Republic and Morocco. Andrew has worked throughout Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Africa, most recently producing a short film in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Founder of The Blue Mind, a production company focused on international films and character-driven stories, Andrew leads a team across several continents skilled in translation, fixing, and production that functions effectively under harsh political, climate, or high-risk environments. As the director of Vemos, Pronto, Andrew has been invited to present and speak at Yale, Cornell, and Fordham universities. And Nos Vemos Pronto is featured in a dozen festivals, domestic and international. and won Best Social Political Film Award at the 2023 Latino and Native American Film Festival. Andrew, welcome. Why don't you give us a little bit of background before we watch?
Hello, everybody. I'm Andrew. Thank you guys first for showing up on a cold Wednesday night when it'd probably be easier if this was an email or a link. But there's a reason it's not a link, and why it's not a blog post or a news article, that it's a film, and it's 25 minutes of audiovisual evidence of what is going on in this part of the world. And that really talks about the why. We're talking about the who, but we're also talking about the how. How did 30,000 Venezuelans end up this year in Colorado? How? You're gonna see that journey. I don't want to talk too much before the film. I want you to experience and come to your own conclusions about the film and about what's going on in the region, in Colombia and Venezuela, in Colorado, in New York, Chicago, Miami. All these places across our country that are experiencing similar influxes of people searching for a better life. And so I want to leave you with a question before the room goes dark, and one of my favorite moments before a movie comes on is that 10 to 15 seconds of collective darkness where you just sort of reflect. And I want you to leave with the hardest question that I've ever received in a question and answer panel discussion. And I want you to think about it, and I want you to linger with you while you watch, and linger with you while we talk after, and linger when you leave and go out those doors and re-enter your lives here in Colorado. The hardest question was, where would you go? Somebody asked me, if the U.S. wasn't suitable for you to live there, wasn't sustainable for you and your loved ones, where would you go?
No somos los primeros, tampoco seremos los últimos, y mucho menos los más sufridos. Formamos parte de un mundo donde sus habitantes repiten ciclos, a veces por estulticia, en ocasiones por descontento, y otras veces porque entre ruinas y bombas hay demasiado dolor. Nos hemos estado moviendo desde el principio de los tiempos para encontrar vidas dignas. Yo pude hacerlo en avión. No tuve que esconderme por mi religión o exponerme a mar abierto en una balsa, ni ir sobre una bestia que se desplaza furiosa. Pero sin importar el medio de transporte, duele. El alma se fragmenta cuando debes despedirte de todo lo que amas y de todo a lo que perteneces, para pasar a formar parte de lo incierto. Para pasar a formar parte parte de lo incierto.
Extraño muchas cosas, extraño el resto de mi familia, extraño mi pueblo, extraño las costumbres, pero extraño la libertad, extraño mucho la libertad. Antes de este socialismo del siglo XXI, sí, había libertad. Había libertad, había todo. Había todo y había todo.
Don Pablo Neruda tiene profunda razón cuando escribió que Bolívar despierta cada 100 años, cuando despierta el pueblo. Sin duda que estamos en una era de despertares, de resurrecciones, de pueblos, de fuerza y de esperanzas. Veamos entonces que como que el tiempo nos llama y nos impulsa. Es sin duda tiempo de recorrer de nuevo caminos de esperanza y de lucha. Después de 10 años de trabajo intenso en el seno del ejército venezolano, después de una rebelión y otra rebelión, ahora dedicados al trabajo revolucionario, empeñados en resistirnos a esa tesis que viene del norte.
El embajador yanqui en Caracas para salir de Venezuela. En solidaridad con Bolivia, aquí estamos los hijos de Bolívar, los hijos de Guaycaipuro, los hijos de Tupac Amaru.
Yo he defendido y he defendido el camino electoral porque creo que tenemos que ver el país más allá de Maduro. Nosotros tenemos que pensar cómo va a ser Venezuela el día siguiente que se vaya Maduro.
Bueno, que él tiembla. Cuando habla de Maduro, cuando habla de Venezuela, tiembla. De ira, de odio. Nuestro país es un país de paz, pero es un pueblo de guerreros también. Que no te equivoques con Venezuela. Somos un pueblo de guerreros, pero también somos un pueblo pacífico. Que no te equivoques con Venezuela. Somos un pueblo de guerreros.
¿De dónde vienes tú?
De Caracas.
Caracas, Venezuela.
Venezuela,
sí, señor. ¿Por qué te vienes de Venezuela?
Bueno, porque aquí tengo una hermana que vive en Perú y me mandó a buscar, me tiene un trabajo. Ahorita el trabajo en Venezuela está demasiado bravo y broma. Y el sueldo ahorita no alcanza para nada, pues, en verdad.
La situación es demasiado brava ahorita en Venezuela, pero ahorita en Venezuela está la cosa demasiado brava. Entonces preferimos migrar, que tenemos familiares que nos van a esperar ya en Perú, que vamos a llegar trabajando, pues, buscando una mejor actividad para la familia de uno.
Claro.
¿Y de qué parte de Venezuela?
Soy por ahí, Barquisimeto.
Barquisimeto. ¿Y cuál es su destino?
Socorro.
Socorro.
Voy a trabajar, de eso es recolectar café. Entonces, pues, me vine a pie porque como uno no tiene familia ni nada. Entonces uno llega allá y le dan trabajito. No gana mucho, pero sí.
Me estaba bañando en el río y cuando me salí, me regresé, pero peleé una piedra y la otra me...
Y, o sea, como que pisó y estaba falsa la piedra y le pasó.
¿Sabes cuánto tiempo necesitas para llegar allá?
Uy, caminando como un mes.
Un mes.
Yo soy nuevo exaltado, se reveló de la piedra y cayó en otra piedra.
Él pisó la piedra, la piedra se bajó.
Así, loco, así.
Así.
Picada, pero así.
Imagino que se abrió una cucota grande.
Una guaraja así.
Yo 10 días caminando.
¿Cansado?
Cansado.
Sí.
Muy cansado.
¿Y cuál es su destino?
Medellín.
Medellín. ¿Tiene familia?
Prácticamente que son $15 en Venezuela, no es nada. Para un almuerzo nada más. Para un almuerzo.
No,
$15
no alcanza,
no es
no
nada.
alcanza para nada.
50.000 bolívares ahorita no es nada. Es un sueldo quincenal, mensual creo yo que es.
Mensual, ¿no?
Mensual. 50.000, ¿qué es eso? Eso no es nada. Eso no alcanza para nada, para nada. Para 2 días y ya, y si acaso.
$10 mensual, que no llega todavía a los $10 mensual en Venezuela. 7, 8 dólares mensual que gana el sueldo mínimo venezolano allá. El destino en ciencia de nosotros es Perú. Y hoy, bueno, vamos dándole para allá donde podemos llegar.
Está muy lejos.
Sí, estamos lejos, muy lejísimos. Y hoy, bueno...
Y hemos visto muchos caminantes así, que son profesionales, ingenieros, arquitectos, ingenieros agrónomos, ingenieros industriales, ingenieros de toda clase de personas hemos visto aquí, que salen de su país, que han estado luchando hasta lo último, pero cuando ya la necesidad de la comida, de la salud, los lleva a salir del país, ¿sí? Y entonces ahí es donde viene la idea de salir de su país, como sea. El otro día, muy curioso que vemos la idea de salir de su país, como sea. El otro día...
Esa noche, esa noche en la que lloras sin parar hasta el amanecer. Los ahorros se van entre la burocracia y el día a día. Y he aquí el momento en donde comienza la preocupación. Mas sigues llorando todas las noches hasta el amanecer. Y conoces a la que de ahora en adelante será tu compañera entrañable. Soledad la llaman. Yo la llamo Soledad Jiménez.
Los medios de comunicaciones no dicen toda la verdad. Venezuela está muriendo literalmente de hambre. Es por eso que se ven estos ríos migratorios. La gente ya no busca una mejor economía, la gente simplemente está huyendo. Todos los días extraño a mi familia. Todos los días extraño las costumbres, todos los días extraño el aire venezolano. Estoy muy agradecido a Colombia. Sin embargo, pues, no es como estar en el país de uno. Mi viaje fue un viaje fuerte. Me vine caminando, dejando la gente que yo quiero, dejando mi pueblo. Y es muy difícil desprenderse de todo eso de repente. Así como a mí me tocó, les ha tocado a muchos y eso es muy fuerte. Y en realidad pues el migrante necesita atención, no solamente con comida, sino necesita una mano amiga. Una mano amiga, y es por eso que decidí hacer esto, dedicarme completamente a esto con mi familia. Estamos dedicados a esto porque vemos, somos dolientes, hemos palpado esta situación. Vemos, somos dolientes.
Señor presidente de la República, doctor Iván Duque Márquez.
Son millones de personas en el mundo que migran huyendo de dictaduras oprobiosas, de circunstancias dolorosas, de pobreza, de pérdida de oportunidades. Y claramente el mundo ha enfrentado este fenómeno en muchos lugares, con dolor, con tristeza y con rechazo.
Cuénteme, hijo. ¿Verdad? Pero usted ya la miró por detrás, que no se la da desconexión. Venezuela, a nosotros los colombianos nos ha tratado mal siempre, la misma ley de allá. Entonces yo digo, cuando uno va a una casa donde no lo quieren, uno no vuelve. Entonces Venezuela es un país vecino, pero siempre nos han maltratado ellos a los colombianos, siempre, toda la vida, y con este régimen que tienen ahorita, peor. Sí. Sí, nos maltratan, no nos quieren, nos tratan como lo peor. Entonces a mí no me gusta ir a Venezuela, no me gusta ir. Usted solamente va y paga para que pase, y que usted no tenga, de que usted no hable cosas. Silencio, o sea, que el silencio, de que usted no hable cosas y usted necesita pasar, listo, vale tanto, y allá por la trocha, allá le cobran y pasan. Eso es lo que lo hacen todo ese, ¿cómo es que dijo ella? Que allá, todos esos inmigrantes, es lo que hacen. Porque hay mucha gente, inmigrantes, que están sufriendo por ahí, con los niños, que ustedes mismos se han dado cuenta, con los niños al hombro, caminando las carreteras colombianas para llegar a otras ciudades, sufriendo necesidades. ¿Sí? Y mejor dicho, es un sufrimiento que uno no desea pasar, y que el gobierno de esos países que pueden ayudar, sigan ayudando al pueblo venezolano. Yo soy colombiano, pero ellos lo que están sufriendo ahorita bastante, y que ayuden al pueblo venezolano, a toda esa gente que de verdad necesita, que está pasando por crisis de toda clase, de toda índole. Eso quisiera, ¿no? Que no olvidaran a ese pueblo de Venezuela.
¿De qué parte de Venezuela?
Portuguesa.
¿Portuguesa? Sí. ¿Tú cruzaste a la trocha o la...?
Por las trochas, porque
¿Sí?
los puentes estaban cerrados.
Sí. ¿Cuánto cobra para pasar para la trocha, para pasar?
Por la trocha piden colaboración, y como uno es músico, no lo ponen a tocar ahí una canción, y a veces ni nos cobran ni nada.
Ah, sí.
Pero es por una colaboración y ya.
Bueno.
Ahorita porque nos toca para poder mandarle a la familia, y la cosa está apretada por allá en el pueblo.
Sí.
Y aquí, malo bien, uno trabajando honradamente y ahorrando, sabiendo administrarse, uno logra muchas cosas, poco a poco.
Sí, he pasado por la trocha y son caminos muy difíciles que uno no se lo desea a cualquiera. Porque hay días de que el río está crecido muchas veces, hay gente que se ha ahogado, amistades se nos han muerto en los ríos, familiares, entonces son muchas cosas que verdad los dos presidentes tienen que ponerse las manos en el corazón. El paso a veces es muy humillante, es muy humillante, hay mucha gente que verdad trabaja a este lado de la frontera, que sobrevive a este lado de la frontera y le toca muchas veces pasar las trochas tarde de la noche, arriesgar sus vidas por un futuro a su familia. Eso sería uno de los ejemplos que le daría yo a los dos presidentes, que se pusieran las manos en el corazón y pensaran en los pueblos, tanto como el lado colombiano como el lado venezolano.
Yo verdad estoy haciendo artesanías con billetes venezolanos, con papel moneda. Sí, carteras, billeteras, monederos. Mira, se lo he hecho con el billete de 50 y de 5.000 bolívares. Cuando molestaba mucho la guardia, entonces uno se metía por la trocha, por San Antonio, el Táchira. Y hay muchos caminos. Y ahí en esa frontera hay varios grupos, está paramilitares y guerrilla disputándose la zona, porque son muchos millones que se mueven. Entonces, hay una guerra. Lo de Venezuela es algo suave para lo que creo que uno saca las cuentas y ve que viene, porque desangraron la tierra y sacaron la sangre, el petróleo. No es verdad. Mucha gente se vino de allá y se equivocó porque pensaban que aquí iban a conseguir un trabajo con un sueldo mínimo, iban a hacer mucho. Y mucha gente se regresó porque aquí si no te rebuscas si no te rebuscas en la calle, mira, en billetes, cartera, billetera, monederos, ¿no?
I have some. I actually have the.
Esa billetera fue hecha con estos dos billeticos. El de
This is a nice thing to play Monopoly with, no?
Mira, este fue hecho con estos billetes, con el de 100 y el de 100.
Todo, la gente a veces piensa lo que nos vinimos a luchar para acá, que todo es fácil. No, es difícil porque uno tiene que luchar para poder mandar a sus familiares.
Es horrible, ahorita está fatal y eso con la devaluación que hicieron nuevamente del Fondo Monetario, eso quedó peor que antes.
Todo el mundo queremos que se mejore para que todos los extranjeros, todos los venezolanos volvamos a nuestro país, pues.
Insoportable, pero lo bueno es que se consigue para sobrevivir.
Bueno, me tocó ser caminante, duré 8 días para llegar a Bogotá, pidiendo cola, las gandolas y caminando varias partes. Y bueno, no fue fácil, pero Dios nunca me desamparó y bueno, aquí estoy. Gracias a Dios no me ha ido mal. Y bueno, yo sé que la perseverancia existe y para adelante y para allá. Y bueno, gracias a Dios me siento bien. Pues. Lo que he logrado, lo he logrado por mí mismo. A los emigrantes que no es fácil, pero tampoco es imposible. Y bueno, mis anécdotas vividas, todo lo que yo he pasado, de verdad que no se lo deseo a nadie. Lo único que yo pido a Dios es que Venezuela se acomode y todos volvamos a estar juntos en nuestro país para que se acaben las discriminaciones, se acabe todo eso y bueno, un mejor futuro para todos nosotros los venezolanos.
Mi hijo me decía en Venezuela, mamá, quedé con hambre. Y yo solo lloraba, no había nada más que hacer. Mi esposa está embarazada y quiero darle la oportunidad de una vida mejor. No es fácil caminar tanto para llegar a otro país. Vale la pena hacer el sacrificio. Mami, mañana me voy del país con lágrimas en los ojos y un nudo en la garganta. Al viajar, recuerdo mi país. Viajar no es olvidar. Me cortaron el cabello, me robaron la ropa, me intentaron violar. No hay como estar en tu país junto a tus seres queridos. A pesar de ser un país diferente, somos seres humanos. Tengo 20 años. Mi sueño es ir a un país y enamorarme. Venezuela, nos vemos pronto.
Andrew, Luis, will you please join me? Irene, why don't you come on up?
There's some maps here. There's some maps here. I always use maps whenever I'm doing something like this, just in case you're not up on your, where all of these countries are.
Testing, testing.
Andrew, would you like to make any comment before we open it up for questions?
Watching it again, I mean, I've seen it so many times. Just watching it again with a room full of people, you realize the power of what goes up there. And every time I see something different, and I don't know, I just think I'm happy with how it came because I really feel like it represented the experience I had and the energy that people passed on to me, and that I hope sort of was carried into the film here. So it's an experience, but I thank you guys for watching. Thank you.
Did you go to Colombia to create this movie? Was that the goal?
No, I didn't. I was traveling in Colombia, backpacking, exploring, and that's when I met Johanna, who's the main poet, and we were quick friends, and we explored the city together, and she taught me to make arepas, and we just had a really good time. And she had mentioned she was from Venezuela, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. I really was not up to speed on what was going on, only knew that in the news something was happening in Venezuela. And so we stayed in contact, and I was looking for something important, meaningful, so I wanted to create something, and so I was looking for a volunteering opportunity, and I saw an opportunity online to volunteer with Los Caminantes, Venezuelan migrants and refugees walking, and I joined a group of international volunteers, about 15 of us from all over the world, stayed in one house, all almost in one room for a month, and we wake up at 6 in the morning, fill a car full of sandwiches, boiled eggs, all sorts of rehydrating liquid suero, and we'd go up and down the highways and hand that. That's where you see in the film a lot of people are carrying these sandwiches, and we give them each person was 5 sandwiches, 2 eggs, and a cup of suero, and we'd go up and down all day, and just starting to hear the stories and listen to where people were coming from or what they experienced, started to sort of see an opportunity to tell these stories that you see on the screen. So the plan was not to go to Colombia and make a film, but as soon as I had this experience, this volunteer experience, it clicked with Johanna. I was like, oh, she's from Venezuela, but she's been here for 7 years in Colombia. These people are just leaving. So how is that experience different, And so I went back to Bogota, where she was, and we started talking all about it. And she revealed that she had these poems that she wrote describing her experience over the course of 7 years living in Colombia. And that first poem, the first part of the film, is the first poem she ever wrote after she left Venezuela for the first time and moved to Colombia. So that all came together sort of organically.
Luis, any comment?
Yes, Colombia, if you look at the map, is right next to Venezuela. In fact, that's a long border between Venezuela and Colombia, and then Ecuador is just west of Colombia, right on the equator. The equator runs through Ecuador. The people who came here, I think it's about 3,000 miles. That's the number I've seen. 3,000 miles to get from there to here, and they would go first. Most of them would go first to Colombia, and then from there start up north. The ones who wanted to come to the U.S. And just by the way, there are more Venezuelans in Florida than in any other state. Although we are here in Denver, we are a straight line from El Paso to here, and then of course we're kind of at a crossroad, which is one of the reasons that many of them come here. But the Darien Gap, I'm sure you've heard of the Darien Gap, which sounds hellacious. Did you see any of the Darien Gap when you were there? So from Colombia to come to the U.S., you go straight north, pretty much straight north into the border between Colombia and Panama. It is about 60 miles through jungles and mountains, and very, very difficult. There are no roads, hardly any paths, but tens of thousands of people have gone through the Darien Gap. For us, I was trying to figure out what it would be like here. I mean, start out in Golden and go 60 miles through the mountains, walking, right? Carrying children, trying to carry food, but you wouldn't be able to carry food if you were with a child. 1 out of 5 persons who has gone through the Darien Gap within the last couple of years, 1 out of 5 is a child. So, I mean, that must be terrible to be able to get here. Once they get out of that Darien Gap, then I think it becomes a little easier. But just imagine what the people here have gone through. And it was amazing to me. It is amazing to me. Everybody in that movie seems so nice, so positive. After what they've gone through, you know, I'd love to have them as my neighbors. Right? They were seemed to be accommodating to you. You were right outside of the screen, right? I mean, right outside the shop. But I did have a question when I was watching it before. I watched it a couple of times in preparation. How did you select the people you were going to interview? I suppose you could run up to almost any of the Venezuelans and ask them, and it would have been an interesting question, but I mean answer. But how did you select who you were going to interview?
So when I was there, I was with one of the drivers. There was a few Colombian drivers working with this this grassroots NGO called On the Ground International, and they had a few drivers working. So Pedro, he's actually the one who is there talking about, we've seen, you know, professors and agronomists, and I spent a lot of time with Pedro going up and down. And so we would talk, and especially when we were trying to select people, he would say, I think we should interview them. I think we should talk to them. Let's check this out. Other times, it just really was random, and also feeling out people's energy. I think one of the things I was most concerned about is going down with a camera and sticking into people's faces, and then, you know, tell me your story. Like, that's in their most treacherous moments to do that. I mean, just vulnerable in all senses. So I just would feel out what people were giving me, and if there was an opportunity to sort of start a conversation, oftentimes would start with a joke, or be talking about with the little kids, baseball. Venezuela is a huge, baseball is a huge sport in Venezuela, so that's sort of how I came to do that. But one thing I wanted to add about the Darien Gap, which is really interesting, and there was a New York Times article, I don't remember how long ago, but they did quite a bit of photo work, and actually one of the journalists went through the Darien Gap, through that journey. And what's interesting about the Darien Gap is people from all over the world are traveling to Colombia or to other parts south of the Gap and traveling through. So you'll get groups of, 3 Cambodian guys, 2 Congolese women, and some Venezuelan people as well. And they're a collective group, and they must rely on each other to survive this place filled with paramilitary groups, war, just the treacherous of the nature of it. It's really, really muddy. I mean, people come out just covered head to toe. So it's this interesting microcosm of the world coming together in this most harsh of conditions, which is, the Darien Gap is really, I would say go and look that up if you don't know what that is when you get home.
Right. I believe it's Ecuador that does not require a visa to get into Ecuador, and therefore people from all over the world, literally, Africa, China, Russia, Ukraine, and so on, if there's a problem for them to get any kind of visa to say, to the U.S. or to Mexico, wherever they fly into Ecuador, I'm sure it's Ecuador, and then to Colombia, and then across to the Darien Gap. So we have a lot of immigrants from a lot of different countries, a lot of different continents, right, coming through the Darien Gap. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, who has a question here for either of our speakers? Okay, I see a hand up there. Why don't you just shout it out?
You mentioned that you spoke with a poet who's been 7 years ahead of this group in interview. You were looking for differences. Did you find significant difference in either the reasons they were leaving Venezuela or their experiences in getting out?
It was interesting going through the 7 poems because you see her evolution over time. And I think the biggest sort of similarity was that first poem. I feel like a lot of people I talked to echoed those same sentiments of, you know, just not feeling like you belong to anything. The biggest difference, and a reason I really wanted to include Johanna in the film, is because she was able to come by plane. And not that it makes it any easier to leave your country, but to have those different perspectives. I mean, there are people who arrive by plane from Venezuela as well here. There's all sorts of different, diverse experiences, you know, not just people walking or being bussed up from Texas, but, you know, arriving here with the means to make it here, but then what? So I think that was kind of the differences where she sort of had an opportunity to establish herself, even though still I'm in contact with her and things are difficult for her to find work. And even though she's been in the country for now 8 years, and but she's had a little bit more resources to be able to get started in the country. So I think that was sort of the difference between a lot of these people on the road. I mean, that's all they had was on their back.
I would add that there have been phases in the emigration out of Venezuela. If you can think back, you know, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, when the economy really just started to get into ruins, plus the political machinations, the attacks against democracy, the people would vote, and then either Hugo Chavez or Maduro would not only ignore the votes, but overturn whatever the vote was for. When all of that first started to happen in such a terrible manner, some of the professionals we might say, and people with some means to be able to fly to, you know, the U.S. or fly to Peru, for example. Peru is a long ways from Venezuela. The more recent ones, I mean, if 5 years ago you had $10,000 in the bank, now that $10,000 you can make the little purses out of, right? And I mean, that's those $10,000 would have dwindled to, I don't know, 50 today, literally. So that's why so again, there have been phases in the emigration out of Venezuela. So now people literally do not have the funds to probably even, you know, get a good amount of food to start on the journey. Imagine setting out with a child to try to go 3,000 miles to go to the U.S. or even, you know, 500 to go to Colombia. So,
If I could just add a story to just sort of personalize that. When I was working at one of the aid tents, so you see Ronald there, he walked, as shown in the film, he walked to Colombia, set up an aid tent, and we would go there and we'd work there and we would massage and wash feet as people came by and provide them food. And during that time, we got a good chance to talk to people. I mean, you're face-to-face washing somebody else's feet. I mean, you really get a chance to have a conversation, a candid conversation. And all of a sudden, this young girl, about 8 years old, comes running up, crying, right to me, and starts speaking. And at that time, I didn't speak Spanish that well. I was in the process of learning, and I couldn't understand what she was saying, so I called over somebody who could translate. And he says, "Oh my God, her brother hopped on the back of a truck without her, and she's all alone now." Yeah. And so there are situations like that where an 8-year-old girl, and this is also another conversation, but after you have that experience, I mean, even if you end up in a place that's warm and cozy, I mean, you're going to be dealing with a lot for the rest of your life. So there's so many stories but that's one thing to just be like, wow.
It's amazing he would leave without her.
Any other question?
Yeah, so I wonder if the population of
population of Venezuelans in Colombia? Do you mean?
Yeah, so the Venezuelans are going to Colombia, and then I'm wondering if a lot of them end up staying there, or, you know, kind of what percentage of people end up staying in Colombia versus making the longer journey on. So in other words, is their population increasing by a lot?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think it's much. There certainly is an increase in population, but a lot of the Venezuelans go into Colombia. I think I said it was 1.8 million that had gone into Colombia, but many of them, I would say, go on to Ecuador, or I think I mentioned Peru a bit ago. So they do go to other countries. But yes, I might just reverse what I said. Yes, the population of Colombia is increasing, but not as much as, for example, again, if 1.8 million have gone in, not all of them stay in Colombia. Some of them, again, they go from Colombia just straight north to that terrible Darien Gap in order to come here. As far as I know, not many of them stay, for example, in Mexico or in any of the other countries, Nicaragua, Guatemala, wherever, between Panama and the U.S. Most of them will come here. That's a great scene in the movie about La Bestia. I mentioned this briefly, but you saw the train with all of the people up on top. They get onto those trains to try to come here, or they will, I mean, any other way that they can come, including walking as far as they can.
I'll try to hold it. It's probably notorious, but I'm not sure. Have you had a chance to talk to any of the children who are in your work with Denver Public Schools who have arrived or with their families about the experience?
I have not, and some of that is on purpose. Denver Public Schools, to reiterate, I'm really pleased with Denver Public Schools. Thank goodness. I'll get back to the question, but thank goodness a year ago, I think it was a little over a year ago, Colorado and Denver really drove this. When we voted to provide free breakfast and lunch to children, imagine those children getting here and the parents bringing them all this way under such terrible hardship. The free breakfast and free lunch and then free snacks at the end, and DPS made certain to provide as much as they could, dry goods, you know, so that the families could cook during the semester break, which was, my goodness, almost 3 weeks. You know, it was 3 weeks long. Imagine if that hadn't happened, because those children can go to school and get breakfast, get lunch, get a snack, a heavy snack at the end of the day, and to provide. There is it's called a welcome center, and it's also called the hub, H-U-B, the hub, that many of the schools in DPS, if there's anybody in DPS, please help me with this, from DPS, the hub, the welcome center, what do they do?
There's hubs all around DPS, so there's multiple hubs. They're in each region. But they help provide food, clothing, basic necessities.
Right. Yeah. Yes, there's a good interview with one of the directors of the education program in Denver, who says, you know, we provide them with this, exactly as you said, food, you know, the basic necessities, clothing, and so on. And then, of course, the education, but I think he was exactly right. They have to have that first in order to become educated, you know. So, but no, I haven't personally. And for one thing, I mean, if any of us were to go into a school and say, I would like to talk to a Venezuelan, the principal is not about to let us, because children have their sense of self and so on. And they also talk in DPS, and thank goodness for this also. I'm pointing to you because you're in DPS. You can take back these compliments. They also have paid attention to having counselors, maybe psychologists, to work with these children, because one of the teachers in DPS, has said, this has been published, has said something like, I have these children in my class, their bodies are here, their minds are sometimes, in what they just experienced. So that's a good question, and but no, I haven't talked to any of them.
Tony.
Andrew, this is such an honorable project that you have done. And I would just like to ask you, what were your intentions with this film? I mean, all of us can take something different and, we can watch it over and over and still, how do you do this again, and what do you want us to do from here? How you've humanized people, and that's what's happened, is people have been dehumanized coming here. And for you to put yourself in this position to go there and bring the journey here versus just them asking us, or us asking them rather, when they come here, what was your journey? You went to them and you documented their journey. So what is your intention for your film, and where do you see it going from here? Did that make sense?
Yeah. From the start, I wanted it to be theirs. As much as it could be. Coming from somebody from the U.S., as much as it could be theirs, that's what I wanted. And to honor those voices and those stories, a lot of them saw the camera as a portal into a world where the screen looks out to a group like you all and can transmit that message, and for you guys to understand what is going on. A lot of people saw me and the camera as sort of a beacon of hope, that if my story gets captured on this camera, on this film, people will know about me. They'll know about my brothers and my sisters. They'll know about the things we went through. And maybe it won't happen to me, but somebody down the line will enact some change for my people. So for me, honoring that portal in my head, that's how I see it, is this portal, this transmission of the story to exactly a place like this, with people who can make a change in their own community by watching a film like this and saying, we have people like this in our community that we can help. So honoring this film and going forward is to take that with you, to be equipped with the understanding and knowing who's around, who your neighbors are. So that's what I hope. That's what I hope for this film, that it honors them.
Next question?
Or comment, I mean, a statement about the film or about what we've been discussing?
I've actually got a question. Has anybody here came in contact with anybody from Venezuela here at all? No? Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Okay.
Let me just make one more comment. This is the League of Women Voters. Thank you so much for the invitation and for arranging this. To go back to the point about the fact that Colorado voted for the free breakfast and free lunch and so on, that took a vote. People had to go out and vote, right? I was really hoping that it would pass. With that Semanario, we wrote an editorial about that for the newspaper. But that tells us, imagine if we had voted for that and then it had been overturned by some politician that didn't want to go along with that. Just flipped and then that politician, as has happened in Venezuela, probably would come after the people who started that petition to vote, because that is what has happened in Venezuela. I didn't downplay what has happened in Venezuela. It's just take, you know, a long time to go through it. But what has happened to democracy, what has happened to the right to vote, and you know, people would say, they're quoted as saying, what good is it to vote because they will be targeted, and that is what happens when I'm getting a little maybe carried away, but that is what happens when there's an autocratic system, because that is what Hugo Chavez and Maduro both did. How do you go, we were talking about this earlier, how do you go from one of the richest countries in the entire continent, the entire continent, to one of the poorest that makes people, you know, makes people leave like that? A lot of that started with what happened to democracy. I think I just said very, very quickly when I was speaking up here, you know, Hugo Chavez had taken over the 3 branches of government. The 3 branches of government as an autocrat. The judicial system, some of the legal matters that had come up in front of the what they would say would be their U.S. Supreme Court, he could just decide what he wanted to happen. So that's how important it is for voting. We have voting, you know, get out the vote and with El Semanario. And so my congratulations to the League of Women Voters.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, Andrew and Luis. We greatly appreciate your time and the sharing of your expertise with us. And the last question of the evening is how? How can you help? Well, you can advocate for immigration reform. Our current system is clearly broken. Migrants endure unspeakable hardship to come to this country after enduring unspeakable hardship in their homeland. When they arrive eager to work and build a life, bureaucracy and politics take over. Work authorization can cost upwards of $500 and takes months, forcing families to live on the streets and municipalities to spend millions of dollars on social services to keep these people alive. Call your representatives and senators regularly to force this issue. Hire migrants for small jobs as they await official work authorization. Things like housekeeping, landscaping, handyman tasks, Spanish lessons, childcare, art projects. Organizations like El Centro de los Trabajadores, please excuse my lack of accent, help to connect people to migrant workers, ensuring these workers receive fair pay and get paid. And of course, donate. Donate your money and your time. We have QR codes here for 2 verified programs helping these folks, or you can donate to LWVCO and we'll direct your donation to one of these groups. Thank you again to our speakers tonight, especially Andrew, who flew in for this premiere, and it wasn't easy. I would also like to thank the League of Women Voters of Boulder County for their partnership in this event and for alerting us to this film, especially Susan Curtis, who really made this event possible by flying out the director-producer, who happens to be her grandson. Thank you, Susan. Thank you to our wonderful partner, El Semanario, dual language newspaper. Publisher Chris Fresquez and his team helped to plan and promote this event, and they're running the live stream, allowing more people to take part. Thank you. El Semanario has been a valued partner for years, and we're so grateful for what they do for our community and our state, as well as being a great support to us. Thank you to Katina Frierson, our Development and Communications Manager, who was the driving organizer behind this event. May we please give her a quick round of applause. Thank you, Katina.
Thank you always to Jane Dunk, our operations manager, who helps with everything. Everything. Please join us on Saturday for our annual legislative conference, where we'll talk about the need to champion democracy this year and beyond. If you haven't already, I hope that tonight has shown you the fragility of democracy and how quickly it can unravel. We must champion our democracy and democratic systems, touting successes and offering facts that prove that the great American experiment can still work if we work together respectfully and transparently. Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you.